Hello, welcome back. I hope you are well. Today we will begin our series of lectures on the European Reformation. So allow me to share my screen with you and we will get started. Okay. Um, so European Reformation occurs in the 16th century. For this lecture, let me provide an outline. We're going to define what the Reformation was, and we'll be introduced to a range of leading theologians and church people that are founding figures within these various traditions that emerge during the 16th century, during the European Reformation of the 16th century. So Erasmus, Luther, Zwingli, Calvin will be introduced to these four Protestant reformers and their traditions throughout the course of the next several lectures on the European Reformation, including the Anabaptist, King Henry VIII and the English Reformation. And finally, we will conclude with a brief overview of the Catholic Reformation and the Council of Trent, which occurred from 1545 to 1563. So first, in terms of the European Reformation, it's this monumental moment in the 16th century which forever changed the composition, the look, and the overall look and the overall reorganization and reimagining of Christian traditions from the 16th century onwards. In other words, prior to the 16th century, here in this map, Western Europe was largely Roman Catholic. It was all part of the Catholic Church for the most part. And then you can see on the right, as you go into Russia, you have the other branch, other major ancient branch of the Christian tradition, Eastern Orthodoxy, um, dominated throughout Russia down into, say, Greece. And then over there, of course, further right, you have Islam. From its beginning in the 7th century and its expansion onwards uh, through Turkey and over to Africa. With the 16th century, you're going to get this unprecedented thing where in Western Europe, you're going to get different forms of Christianity that emerge, usually supported, almost always supported by um, political powers, whether it be kings or whether it be princes. You have these theologians and their teachings, which are a part of and become a part of these different emergent empires, or kingdoms, or proto nation states, and they're going to rupture and become different types of Protestant Christianity, from Reformed theology to Lutheranism to Anglicanism to Calvinism. All of this occurs, this kind of fragmentation and diversification of Western Christianity. It all occurs from being basically just Roman Catholicism to being Roman Catholicism, yes, which is still the largest tradition, the largest branch of the Christian traditions. But you get all this diversity, which first begins in the European Reformation. So, defining the European Reformation, what is it? It's a series of parallel movements of protests from church leaders. It's a protest in print. It occurs with the emergence of a middle class who participate in the European Reformation. So it's led by church leaders, by academics, but you also have this emergent middle class that's participating in the European Reformation. It's about proto nation states. These theologians who we're going to talk about would have not succeeded and got their message out with such great effect, often without the support of different political leaders. It's not a schism, which would be an internal break, nor is it a heresy, which would be a deviation from standard belief without reference to power. Rather, it's this fragmented yet cohesive development of patterns of worship, belief, and new institutions for the whole of society that emerged in the 16th century. It's these fragmented movements which comprise the European Reformation. Prior to the European Reformation, we had moments that were kind of setting up what was to come. We have moments of reformation. We have moments of protest. One such moment comes from today, which is the Czech Republic, comes from Jan Hus. Jan Hus wrote a work called On the Church, in which he challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. Therefore, he was called to give an account for his teachings on the church. And during the Council of Constance, which occurred between 1414 and 1418, he was called down to that particular council. At that council, where he was called to give an account for his theology of the church, which undercut the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, he was burned at the stake. He was killed. He was executed during this council. If you go to old Prague today, in the Czech Republic, in the middle of the town square in old Prague, there's a statue. There's a statue of Jan Hus, which you see here. The statue has written on it below here, translated into English, live, it states on the bottom of the statue, live, nation sacred in God, don't die. I believe that anger thunders will cease and that the government of your affairs will return to your hands, Czech folk, who are the warriors of God and his law. Here, in this inscription below this monumental statue in the middle of Old Prague, here you have basically a lot of the main components of the European Reformation. You have the tying together of nation and God, of state and religion. These two things often work together during the Protestant Reformation. So and this is a foreshadow of what we're going to see during the Reformation. It's kind of bringing together of, say, national identity, if we could use that term at this point, with Christianity. Another characteristic of the Reformation is the tendency for these reformers, these Protestant theologians, to be highly educated and thus to have the capacity to return to the sources. The term here in Latin is ad fontes, is to return to the sources. And ad fontes underscores this tendency to return to the sources in their original languages. So the New Testament was written in Greek, and these Protestant reformers were trained at the universities in New Greek. And so they could return to the sources in their original language without relying on other people's translations, which gave them more space for kind of independent exploration and an independent study. They also returned to the church fathers in their original languages, whether it be Greek or whether it be Latin. So we have these Protestant reformers who are really who really come out of this tradition, this intellectual tradition, which is known as Christian humanism. One of the leading Christian humanists was Erasmus of Rotterdam. He was a Christian humanist from the Netherlands. Of note, he produced his own edition, 5 editions of the Greek New Testament with a parallel Latin New Testament, which was the official church language of the West, in the other column. Of note, at times he translated passages different than the what was the church Bible for over 1,000 years in the Latin-speaking West. It goes back to Jerome, who translated the Bible into the Latin in the early 5th century, and it became known as the Latin Vulgate. That was the standard Bible. That was the Bible that was being used up until the European Reformation. When you get Christian humanists, such as Erasmus of Rotterdam, coming up with their own editions and translations of the New Testament, which was written in Greek, into Latin. Of note, when Erasmus arrived at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, verse 17, he translates it differently than Jerome. Jerome translated this passage from the Greek into Latin, here in English for us, as "do penance, for the kingdom of God is at hand." The word here, "do penance," in Greek is metanoia, which means to change one's mind. So, as is the case often in translation, there's some level of liberty in decision making. So he translates metanoia into "do penance," which supports the penitential practice of the Roman Catholic Church. So when one wants to make right work off their temporal punishment within the Catholic tradition, you do that by doing penance, whether it's prayers, whether it's doing acts of charity, whether it's taking pilgrimages. You do these earthly acts, usually not entirely burdensome, but nonetheless, you do these earthly acts, and these serve as penance to work off what is known as your earthly punishment for sin. The punishment in terms of eternity is taken care of by Christ Jesus, is paid, but in terms of earthly. So this is stuff that's related to purgatory within the Catholic tradition. You do penance either here on earth, or you could do it in purgatory, which should come that middle space in between here in heaven, prior to entering heaven. This teaching isn't continued amongst the Protestant theologians and churches. And when Erasmus arrives at this passage, he interprets it not to do penance, but to be penitent. So to be is underscoring a kind of a disposition rather than an action. And that difference might seem minor to us, but in the context of what's occurring in the 15th and 16th centuries around different theologies emerging amongst Protestants and some negating, some rejecting the practice of doing penance, you see how reinterpreting this passage, these are the words of Jesus here. Okay, these are the words of Jesus. So now you see I was interpreting the words of Jesus as not saying do penance, but be penitent. Like have a heart of contrition, right? Have a heart that recognizes the need to change one's mind. It's more of a being, a state of being rather than doing. This type of translation occurs amongst the Christian humanists here and there and challenges the Catholic tradition at given points. So whether it be another key point with the rise of the Christian humanists, another key point is the European Reformation would have not happened as rapidly, or when it did, without the invention of the printing press. Here in the first century, when you have Paul founding the Christian church, he used Ignatian Way and other Roman highways to travel and to send his letters by through his co-workers. And so that was the process by which transmission occurred, and that was crucial, right, for the early advancement of the Christian tradition. Likewise, in the European Reformation, it's the invention of the printing press in 1450, which made it possible for the dissemination rapidly of these different Protestant theologians, ideals, perspectives, teachings, treatises, and so forth. Later, transmissions even going to happen more rapidly, and Christianity again will be quick to use these technologies, whether it be the radio from the early 20th century, or whether it be later on in that century, the television. The Christian traditions, pastors, televangelists, likewise, just like they made good use of the printing press during the European Reformation to get their message out. Likewise, Christians and Christian pastors, evangelists have always been keen on using the most up-to-date technology to get the message out. Today, of course, you could see this on different social media platforms, whatever it happened to be, right? It's another way that people could have influence, right? We call people influencers now. And the reason they're able to influence so quickly now is because they can do it from the comfort of their home or from wherever it happens to be. By simply using their phone, they could get a message out super quickly, instantaneously, right? wasn't quite so quick with the printing press, but the printing press versus what existed prior to it, the difference in speed of getting out message was immense, right? It's immense. It's a quantum leap. And that facilitated the European Reformation. The fact the Protestant theologians could get their ideals out so quickly was foundational for creating the conditions within what occurred was the European Reformation. So theologians such as Martin Luther, the German Protestant, amongst others, used this technology, right, in order to transmit the message at an unprecedented speed throughout the European Reformation. We'll start with Martin Luther next lecture, but for now, why don't we leave it there and we'll pick it up next lecture. All right. Okay. So thank you so much and take care and I'll see you next time. Thank you.